come to ask you how you're doing these days. Didn't come to roll no stones away, no. I come to tell you that the end is nigh. I come to prophesy, yeah.
I'll listen up, especially once you start talking. It's easier. That's when I have to talk by myself, and I'm like, oh god. So, welcome back to Talk Fiction, a podcast dedicated to entertainment media's most overlooked underdogs, fiction writers. I'm your host, Meg Oolders, author of the Waddy Award-winning novel C. Smile and the creator of the dynamic Substack publication Stock Fiction. My guest today is Ben Wakeman. Ben is the one-man band behind the curious and eclectic Substack Catch and Release, where Ben shares everything from short fiction to essays, audio narration, video journals, and original music. He has also serialized 2 novels, The Memory of My Shadow and Harmony House, for his ever-growing community of engaged readers. As one loyal fan puts it, Ben is a virtual kaleidoscope of creativity, sharing anything and everything ignited by his seemingly boundless talent and imagination. I'm not going to say who said that, but you might know her. I will drop links to Ben's amazing work as well as my own in the show notes, but without further ado, allow me to introduce my distinguished guest, Ben Wakeman. Hi, Ben.
Hi, what an intro.
Do you feel fancy now?
I feel really fancy.
That's always my goal, because it's got to be the coolest thing ever just to hear someone talk about you in the third person.
Yeah, it's like a eulogy.
When you have to write your own bio and you have to do it that way, it always feels a little funny, but when somebody else does it, it's like, ooh,
Yeah.
that's kind of fun. So here we are. And what I like to, I've just been starting, I've only done 2 of these so far, but every time I always want to just sort of backtrack and figure out how we found each other on Substack. So I know for my part that you were handed to me by Tom Pendergast. He had read a piece of mine that had a romantic edge to it, which is not always Tom's cup of tea, but he sent me your Lonely Hearts pieces.
Oh, right.
So those were the first things that I read. And I also listened to them at his invitation, which is how I discovered that you have this gift for audio narration, which I envy greatly because I don't trust myself to read any of my pieces out loud. I'm far too snarky for that. But so that's how I came across you. And I feel like it was probably shortly thereafter that you came around to me.
No, it was the same. I think you were probably in the top 2 or 3 people that I connected with in any kind of real way on the platform. And ever since, it's just been, as you know, a really amazingly supportive community of writers. But yeah, I think I first misunderstood your stock fiction and thinking that it was because I've always laughed because I've worked in digital media for my entire career, building software and stuff. So you have to do design work. You inevitably look at thousands of stock photos.
Oh, yeah.
So I originally thought that you were just the whole premise of your thing, which I thought was great, was just taking a piss at really goofy stock photos where you see people that look like Sears models pointing over there.
Right. Which is funny because I've actually used very few of those cheesy stock photos and found more of these sort of quirky ones. But as I've admitted multiple times now on this show and elsewhere, like I've sort of abandoned the original premise of my Substack altogether, which is, we're going to get into this because obviously you and I are, I think, cut from a similar cloth in that we are multitudes, I like to call it. I'm sure there are other words to describe people that just dip their toes in a lot of different creative spaces. And for whatever reason, and you can speak for yourself on this, but there's a resistance to picking a lane, which, you and I might agree or disagree is sadly a hindrance for us in terms of finding our place in all this. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. But before we get into that, I do want to touch on our celebrations and our frustrations for the day, because this is just a little icebreaker thing I like to do.
Sure.
I'm going to let you go first, and you can share the celebration or the frustration first, whichever feels right.
There's a lot of things to celebrate in my life right now, but I think if we're thinking just Substack specific stuff, I think I'm closing in on the end of this Harmony House novel that I started I guess it was September last year. So it's been like a more than 6 month journey to do it. There's like 7 episodes left. And I'm just so grateful that I've had so many folks kind of come along and stay along. I was just worried that it's one thing to get people their interest peaked at the beginning of something, but to keep them there and so many really fantastic writers that I admire, like Eleanor and Eleanor Anstruther, Adam Nathan, there's Nathan Slick. There's just so many folks like that I'm like, wow, you read my stuff every week. Chloe Hope reads it every week in comments, which is just a blessing to have these great writers validate it. So to me, that's what I'm celebrating, coming to the end of this delivery and of the story that I've been working on for so long.
Fantastic.
And frustration, which is kind of a blessing curse thing. Another celebration is I actually have money again, some actual income.
Right.
So started working, and which comes with the frustration, which is having considerably less time to do this thing that I love. That's really my only real frustration. That's just the normal friction that every human has.
Yeah. And actually, that's something that I have later on in my questions to talk about that, because I also recently went back to work part-time, which is different. And obviously you're going back to like a substantial career that you left. But I do want to talk later about just what that was like, making the step back for you. So in terms of I want to start with my frustration, just get it out of the way, because I've just been very frustrated with myself lately. My sort of anti-superpower of sabotaging my own progress has gotten to be a little bit annoying lately.
What does that look like? How do you mean?
I'm trying to do the agent querying thing, and I've like barely chipped off, the first part of it. It's just the whole thing makes me so uncomfortable and unhappy. And it's like, so I keep saying, why am I doing it? And I know why. I know what the result is that I want it to potentially lead to, but man, the process just goes against all of my inner instincts. And so then it's like I get down on myself. I'm like, am I just like lazy? Like, do I just not want to do the work? Yeah. But I know I'm not lazy. I mean, I work really hard at everything I do. I get frustrated when I'm putting a lot of time and energy into something that feels futile. And that's the frustration, is I've decided it's futile when I don't really know that yet. I haven't really given it the old college try, as they say. And I really want to be able to say that I have. So it's like, I know I need to do it so I can say that, but I'm just constantly saying like, this is not going to lead to anything. This is just going to be a chunk of frustration for me for the next, 4 to 6 months. Yeah. So
it's always been a lottery ticket in my opinion. And I think it's even worse now, if that's possible. But I mean, I think, you hear about the success stories, and those are the things that continue to motivate everyone, but you don't hear about the other 99.9% of people who query for, years and years and never get an interest.
It really is. It's definitely a lottery. And I still feel like I'm not going to find, if I ever have an agent, I don't think I'm going to find them through cold querying. I'm not the kind of person that's going to connect with somebody that way. So in that way, it feels kind of wrong to me, but I've decided to make it less of a focus and just, if someone hands me a name or I'm feeling like I want to, push in that direction, I'll just sit down and do it for a little while. But I've taken it off my plate as being a primary focus right now, because it's just making me unhappy, and who needs that?
Yeah.
So then I'm going to share my celebration, which I won't give too many details on it because it's still kind of early, but this was kind of a fun thing. I got approached by someone through Substack's direct messages, which is now a thing, for good or ill. This was for good. So someone who I guess knows who I am from Substack invited me to do a workshop at a conference, a short story festival in the fall.
Wow.
So I know, really cool. And I always feel like those sort of things that come out of nowhere, just because you've been doing what you like to do and someone picked up on it, like that's the best kind of stuff, in my opinion. So that felt really good. I got to kind of come up with the theme of the workshop. And again, I won't share too much now, because once it goes out, all the marketing material, I'll definitely be sharing it with everybody. And hopefully people will shell out some money to go to this festival and see what I'm doing, but we'll see. So yeah, that's my celebration. Just a little
nice,
cool thing that happened over there.
That is awesome. Yeah. When that stuff happens and it just comes along organically, it's the way that it feels like it's supposed to work, for all the paddling that you do otherwise.
Well, that's the thing. You have to trust that the things that you're doing are planting seeds somewhere. And it's hard to trust that sometimes because it does feel kind of futile sometimes when you're just going,
Yeah.
and nothing's coming back in your direction. So that was a good thing. So thank you for doing that with me. I appreciate it. I just think it's a fun way to start because everybody usually has something that they're celebrating, and we all definitely have something that is frustrating us on any given day. So I think people like to hear that other people are frustrated too. I think it makes me feel better. So let's get back to the topic at hand, our multitudinousness. Is that a word? Multitudinousness? I'm going to make it a word for
Keep
today.
going.
I'll spell it for everybody in the notes. So first, let's talk about catch and release. I feel like I found you when you were pretty new still, because I actually went back and I read your first post, your High Wire Act post. So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about, and share as much as you want about what led you to doing this and, what it was like to kind of, because in your case, you came from a full-time career and then you made the decision to try to do this crazy noise and nothing else.
Yeah. Well, it was not by choice. I mean, doing Substack was definitely by choice, but I mean, how I ended up there was not. I got laid off in November of 2021 now? It's 22. I'm bad with numbers.
That's right. You're a writer. We don't have to know anything about numbers.
So yeah, I got laid off from a job, and it was wildly unexpected, and it was a big blow. I built a lifetime of a career to get to that sort of that point, and there was a lot of tech layoffs during that time. I have always thought of my technical jobs as a day job, which is crazy, when you're at a point where you're like the head of product management at a big company and managing 15, 16 people, and you still think of it like a day job.
Right.
It feels like a shitty thing to do. It feels like an ungrateful thing to do. But it's always been a means to an end. To me, the creative thing has always been there. I've continued to play music and make records and write, and all that stuff is what feeds my soul. And I'm most passionate and interested about those things. I can do the other stuff, and I have to pay the bills, as we've talked about. So yeah, I would not have made this leap to say I'm not going to go back if it wasn't for my partner, Paradise. She was like, your eyes were just dead at the end of every day, and you're so much more alive now. Just, take a little bit of time, take a year, commit to a year. And I did a little more than a year, actually. And I was all over the place when I started my Substack, completely all over the place. It was like something that had been pent up for so long. I was shooting off in 18 directions. Like, I'm going to do a song a week, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to create a video series. I'm going to do it. And it was just, way too much. It was too much for anyone to pay attention to. And hopefully I've narrowed it a little bit and focused a little bit more. But I like you have this, I don't know, phobia of getting completely stuck in a rut of a lane of just like, this is you and this is what you do. And unfortunately, the rest of the world really needs you to be that.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you're Ben Wakeman, the novelist, or you're Ben Wakeman, the singer-songwriter, or you're Ben Wakeman, the product leader. Or
it helps people to categorize us that way. Like,
really does.
It doesn't help us to be categorized, for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'll say too that, since I've been following you, I would say I don't look at your Substack and go, he's all over the place, but you do still, occupy a lot of different spaces and share a lot of different types of media and things. So I think maybe you've just streamlined the way you do it, but it doesn't feel haphazard or off the wall to me. It feels very deliberate. And yeah. And I've kind of embraced the same thing. Like I said before, like when I started out, I was doing one short story a week based on a photo prompt that I found for myself. And I did that steadily for a while. And I think once that started to pick up in terms of people paying attention, I was like, okay. Then I was nervous about doing things like I called them outliers in the beginning, like something wacky. Like what's hilarious to me is I remember the first two pieces of mine you read were Everything, which was that romantic sort of piece about the age diverse couple who, basically the woman says, oh, we're doomed from the start. And it's like this big,
Yeah.
So that, and then Awkward as Fuck, which was my acronym.
I love that so much.
Yeah, it was so fun to write. But that might have been I think that's the first humor piece that I ever posted. And when that did well, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can be like a chucklehead in here and people can get on board with that. And since then, I've definitely, pushed the envelope with some, cringier stuff. And I'm always pleasantly surprised at how much people like it. So it's kind of, it does really help when you have the people to back up your, multitudinousness, which that's the word of the day. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about your most recent post, which until it came out wasn't part of my plan, but you created that post called Good with Words. I'll have to spell it for people in the, in the notes, but basically you wrote a narrative and you butchered it in terms of misspellings and grammatical errors and lack of punctuation and capitalization. And I have to tell you, it was a delight and an absolute nightmare to read. Because what it did was it gave the narrator this really interesting voice, just the visual of those words being wrong. It kind of reminded me of like my title for the bestseller pitches post I did, the 2 days to win the stupid, where like all the words for two were spelled correctly, but in the wrong place. It just kind of like, it messes with your head, but you get it at the same point. So like, honestly, I remember a little bit about the narrative. It wasn't like it was a story that has stuck with me emotionally or anything, but it was entertaining. And then you got to the end of it and then you switched gears and you said, I wonder what will happen if I feed this, to the chat bot to fix it, basically. And then I got like 4 lines into the fixed edition. I'm like, I don't need to read this. It's not even fun. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm sure it was beautifully written by the robot, but I liked your first version so much better. And you made a comment too, and I think I pulled the quote. You said, read the grammatically safe version below. Soon, this smoothing out of all the rough edges will help us to live in a world free of anything interesting. And I just love that because it's so true. We're sanitizing everything, and there's a sameness that it seems like the gatekeepers are after. They want what they already know works. They're not taking chances on this wacky shit that we're creating, but it's for the reader, it's so much fun. And I think that's the missing piece. That's the more I learn about it, I'm like, they care more about the package that you're putting your book in than how it's going to affect an actual reader. Because they're packaging it for a publisher, not a reader.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like there's a disconnect there, which I think like for you and I and people that are writing on Substack, we're finding an easier time getting people to love what we do where the readers are, which is what you want, right? So the reason I brought up that post is because of the AI piece, because this isn't the first time you've kind of messed with AI for our entertainment and benefit. You had another post, and I forgot to get the title of it, but the one where you went like head to head with it, like you even wrote a song and then had like a robot write a song, and it's like, oh, which one do you like better? And it was just, it was a creative use of the tools that are out there. And so I do want to ask you about like what your current relationship to AI is, because obviously I'm not going to suggest that you've befriended it. I wrote, you guys friends, question mark. Because I have avoided it like the plague. When I see that little Copilot pop up when I'm doing a search in my browser, I'm like, no, turn that off. I don't want robots searching for me. I can do it myself.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about where your interest in AI started. Obviously, you come from the tech world, so it's been entering that field for probably a lot longer than it's been entering our creative field. Yeah. So I'll stop talking and let you talk now.
No, I think I'm largely optimistic about all of it. It's a tool. And I think that it's just this kind of funny thing. And there's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that happens with anything. And it amplifies at a societal level, right? We've, for decades, really since the beginning of filmmaking and story writing, in science fiction, it's always been this dystopic vision of the future of like the machines will take over, right? We've created that. And ironically, all of the large language models that have been consuming all of the content on the internet and in book form and videos and movies have ingested all of that stuff.
Right.
It's like a little bit of an echo chamber. So if you start having a conversation with it, it will start going down that path of, and then we'll do this and we'll do this.
I honestly have never talked to a chatbot. It creeps me out a little bit. Like I don't want to try it.
Yeah. I think for me, having a technical understanding of exactly kind of what's not exactly, I'm not a machine learning engineer, but I understand the concepts and I know enough to be dangerous. And at the end of the day, it's all ones and zeros. So being afraid of it is like, CDs and digital music was first introduced, where people were like complaining about all the things that were wrong with it, and that it was not as cold, or it was not as warm, and all these things. And it's like, how can zeros and ones represent anything? And it's this interesting paradigm that we as we're pushing ourselves further, which we can't help but do as a human race. We're just going to constantly find a faster, easier way to do things. And that post, that just to go back to the goofy one I wrote, and the strange narrative voice, was my attempt to hack my own brain. Mm-hmm. Because I get into a mindset where this is the persona that I am. This is how I think about things. This is how I talk. This is how I write. And part of me was like, no, fuck that. You can be something completely different. You can come from some other place that no one knows, not even you know. And I didn't really decide till I finished it to be like, okay, well, what would happen if I just took this verbatim, dumped it into Chat GPT, and said, okay, just rewrite this.
Yeah.
And it does. And it makes a completely coherent story. It follows all the beats that I had. And it does it in a completely sanitized way. It took off all of the rough edges. Mm-hmm. It took away the armored dildos. And, it, without me asking, I didn't give it any prompts. I said, rewrite it. And it did. And that's what I worry about is going to happen, because the things that we cherish, the things that we love, will take shortcuts to, just because humans are lazy at the end of the day. And
we don't have enough time, which we've discussed. We're running, we're crushing too much stuff into our days. And so faster we can get to things that we like.
My advice, if you're asking for what I think about how AI is useful, there's so many ways. And I think that there's going to be this quick divide within our society of people who are embracing it and learning how to use it for what it's good for, which is to be an assistant. Think about all the grunt tasks that you do in your life, whether it's writing or whether it's some other kind of work, knowledge work. They're getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And the more that information you give it, the better it can be to help you do the things that you want to do.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I saw my family over Easter, and my sister was talking about how she used an AI to help. She's looking for work again after being out of work, and to write a cover letter. She like shoved her resume in there and like all this stuff. And she's like, it sounded like a cover letter.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking, as you're talking and I heard her say that, I'm like, how many people are writing their query letters? Because man, I like lose sleep over those things. Like, am I putting myself on the page in a way that it's just, you put so much into it, and you're like, and somebody else can just like feed a bunch of info and come out with something that's sadly as likely to get them an agent as my letter is, which I slaved over. So it becomes like a pride issue too. You're like, no, I'm not going to take shortcuts. I'm going to be, the gritty, dying on this hill artist who's like, I will go down in history as never touching AI ever. I'll probably be very sad and alone while everyone else is having fun. But that's life. Thank you for sharing all that. I like hearing about it, and I like reading about it from people, especially people who have some experience in the field of it. Actually, is it, I always worry I'm pronouncing her first name wrong, but she writes the Muse, Brigitte. I can't remember.
I don't think I follow her.
It's fabulous. I'll put a link to it in the thing, but she came from working for Google, and now she writes a lot on that publication in particular about AI and where it's been and where it's going and how it's affecting things. So I'll definitely share that with you. I think you would really find it interesting. Yay, connections.
Yeah. So
this next part, I want to actually ask you about The Memory of My Shadow, which admittedly I have not read, but since you posted, you did a post called The Empathy Chip, which I really dug into. And that was kind of, you were sort of taking a little bit of the premise of The Memory of My Shadow and sort of unfolding it for us. So I'm just curious to hear like where your inspiration for that story came from. And I'm hoping all this is going to lead into a discussion about the project that we just did together, the Same Walk, Different Shoes project, because I think it all sort of ties together.
Sure. Yeah. The Memory of My Shadow is, I think it was I had written 2 novels prior to that. And the first one was largely autobiographical. That was not my intent. It was very much about musicians and family and the challenges of the two. And, it's an embarrassing novel when I go back and look at it. It's still out there. It's on Amazon.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Rewind Playback is the name of that book.
Neat.
It's not embarrassing. I mean, it's growth. You start somewhere. But it gave me a taste for what I wanted to do. And then the next book that I wrote was also very much an emotional novel, personal relationships, childhood abuse, difficult subjects.
Mm-hmm.
So the third one, I was like, I can actually write about anything I want to write about. What am I interested in? What is my experience grounded in? And I like took these different themes of like, okay, well, this was 6 years ago when I started writing it, I think. And I was like, there is something happening with AI. I saw in the beginning this sort of nascent thing happening. I knew it was going to become something. I was like, well, what if it really did exceed all of our expectations in terms of like just coming in faster than anyone could ever predict?
Right.
That was the first thing. The second thing was school shootings, where I've been an opponent of guns since I can remember. Just I grew up in a rural area, and it's weird that I didn't have that as part of my life, but it's just the way my parents raised me. And then just seeing just the epidemic of shootings that's happened in this country, it just is so disheartening. And we get more and more desensitized to it, and they become less and less real. And I was like, damn it, I want to write a book that like puts this front and center again, so that I can feel it for myself again, and maybe other people who read it will be put back there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had these two interesting tensions of like this future AI that can be made to think and feel as a human, and this woman protagonist who her brother is the school shooter, and the deadliest school shooting in American history, her twin brother, happens when she's 16, and it sort of sets the course of her life, and she becomes this amazing engineer and creates essentially a digital companion. And her invention is not AI itself, but the ability to telepathically communicate with it, so that you have like a little device that you put on the base of your neck, and you can think and it will respond. So it's like having a conscience, and it's like having.
I was going to say the word conscience came to me, but yeah.
This was a long rambly thing, but that's sort of the premise of the book. And the empathy chip thing, the essay that I wrote, really came out of I did an interview with Kimberly Warner for her Unfixed podcast, which is fantastic. By the way, if people are not checking that out, they should. What we talked about, she's like, well, you should do this essay contest about, if it's 2050 and you're looking back about how you changed the world, what would it have been? And I was like, okay, well, yeah, I think that what a machine can do that a human cannot do is it can be programmed, and it can be tireless. And we think about the tirelessness of machines like the Terminator that are out to destroy everything. But what if it was tireless in its ability to actually enforce something that allowed you to be your best self? And that's kind of the idea. And to me, that idea was empathy. If I could change one thing at a societal level, if everyone had more empathy on a daily basis, most of the problems in society would just go away.
Right. Well, because how much of the problems that we're having just have to do with fear and ignorance, because we're not willing to kind of put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Segue. Segue to my next question. So I was fortunate enough to take part in, what was essentially an empathy exercise for a big group of writers on Substack, courtesy of your powerful organizational skills, which I'm still in awe of, because that was a lot to wrangle. So you put out the call at some point, like, this is what I'm thinking. I want to, bring a bunch of writers together, and we're all going to submit a prompt of a moment in our past that sort of changed the course of who we are. And we're going to hand those in anonymously, and everyone's going to get assigned someone else's prompt, essentially, to turn it into a story in the first person. That was one of the rules. So you're essentially adopting someone else's story, which is a lot of times what we do, when we're reading a book. I mean, if you're reading a book in the first person, it inevitably happens that you're suddenly in their shoes. But sometimes it's more challenging if it's a world that's not familiar to you, or it's, we were like crossing gender lines and, orientation lines and all this, age gaps. There was just a lot of space to explore. And so I think you had how many participants in the end?
I put the call out. I had no idea there would be so many people. That I think 50 to 60 folks expressed interest, and then many dropped off, as you would always expect once they get into like, I can't do this, or I can't commit to this, or it's too hard, or life happened. We ended up, I think, 41 writers. But the cool thing is that a number of people stepped up because we had already, like, many people dropped out super late in the process, which meant that some of the writers didn't actually get their stories told by someone else. So Eleanor Anstruther, and a couple, I can't recall their names right now, but they were sweet enough to take a second prompt and write 2 stories. So that was really cool.
And I mean, what was valuable for me about it, aside from the fact that it was just a really interesting way to take on an idea and run with it, was just the number of new voices I got to experience as a participant in it. And that was my choice to read every single one of those 42 stories, which is a commitment. It was like reading a book, basically. But I did. I chipped away at them, and you're in your head. You're like, ooh, like, I wonder whose story this is, and you try to like place people. And then we had the little meeting at the end where we got to see some people's faces, and I didn't actually hear from the person whose story I wrote in the beginning, and I was feeling a little envious of the people that had like connected. But then eventually I did, and it was just such a nice thing to hear from them, and that they were pleased with the story. And so I thought that was just such a wonderful thing to do. And I know you're sort of toying with the idea of doing it again, maybe this summer. So obviously I'll be on board, and hopefully for anyone who's listening, just pay attention to Ben's Substack and you can get in on the.
It did so much more than I really ever hoped it would do. And that I couldn't be more pleased with that. I think the coolest thing is exactly what you said, of this sort of personal connection that you establish with someone else.
Right.
For people listening or watching this, many people shared very, very personal, dark, hard, tragic things that happened in their life, and anonymously, of course. And then a writer would pick it up and just try and imagine the rest of the story, putting themselves in that position. And it was very emotional. It was emotional for me, certainly, and hearing my story echoed back from the fantastic writer who took it on. So yeah, that to me was great. And the side benefits were obviously everyone discovered a whole new crop of writers they weren't even aware of.
Right.
And that's the challenge in this world, is there are people that are on Substack that have 5 subscribers that may be fantastic writers, but just don't have the time or know how to find readers, to do all the hoops you have to jump through to get readers.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like an activity like that is one of the best ways to do it, is to just show up in somebody else's comments. And you've talked about this before too, just the championing of each other's work and how valuable that is. Because not only does it just improve someone's day tremendously to see that someone read something that they wrote and wanted to share it, but I think it creates a little spark for you with that person who shared it. Like, maybe I'll go check out what they're doing. That was really generous. And I do think it fosters a lot of good feelings overall.
I didn't want to put any barriers to entry on it too. I mean,
right.
I didn't want to make it a fucking competition where you have to enter to be able to do it, or you have to reach a certain bar.
No, I appreciated that. And a lot of people admitted, even in the intros to their own posts, you're like, I'm brand new at this. This is the first time I've ever written fiction. Like, some people were poets and some people like had never written a short story. And so I loved that people were trying something and in a very, public way, but there was a community feeling around it too. Like they weren't by themselves, which was.
There's so much emphasis in our society around gatekeepers. We talked earlier about literary agents or querying to try and get a major publisher to publish your work. And I get it. There's reasons for why people want to do that. They don't have time. They want someone else to vet everything for them so that they can see the Rotten Tomatoes score before they waste any time on something, right?
Right.
And I'm guilty of the same thing. But I subscribe to the philosophy that, George Saunders has talked about ad nauseum, who's a writer I admire a lot. And I think I admire him more as a teacher than a writer. I'm sure a few people probably know who George Saunders is.
Yes, one or two.
Substack, 1 or 2 people may know. But the thing that I took away from him mostly was, it's like in his early days of teaching, he would be like, my job is to correct everything, or to be able to point out like 100 notes within a story for someone, just mark it up with red.
Right.
And he goes, now my job is to find the one thing in the story that moves me, that I feel like really sparks something in me, and tell them all about that. All the other stuff that doesn't work, they'll figure out.
Yeah. Well, that's huge. And I'll admit that I subscribed to George Saunders early on, and then I got overwhelmed with the frequency of the posts, and also felt like I wasn't able to participate because I hadn't read his stories that he was talking about, or I just couldn't keep up. But when I give feedback now, because I've had a couple people reach out to me, which is another cool thing, when someone's like, look at this and tell me what you think. Like, I make a real point of not pointing out typos or sentence structure things and the stuff that they're going to get on their own in revisions, but like I really do, I try to ask questions too, like, this is great. How can I have more of this? Or, you know, how can you give me more of this earlier on? Or how can you, so I try to, yeah, that was really cool that that's kind of his take on it, because I think that's more valuable, and it's more valuable for me too. Like I feel like, and I've sort of stopped doing this, you know, when you have the opportunity early on in your writing quest, you're like, oh, I have a chance to have like an editor look at my first pages or whatever. And I swear they're just looking for things to be wrong. That's how it feels.
Yeah.
Like
they're not looking to be inspired or
no, it's kind of like, because you're taking them up on this service that they're offering, that they need to find something wrong with your work. Otherwise, what are you paying for? You know what I mean? So I do feel like feedback on a piece as a whole, you know, how it makes you feel, where you connect, and where you're maybe missing something that you wonder if there's a way to fill in that gap. You know, that kind of stuff I think is really valuable. So that's good to hear. That George Saunders and I are so similar.
In every way.
Right? We are the same person. I'm just less busy, everybody. So if you want me to look at your short stories, by all means, email them to me. Okay, so now I'm going to get to the piece about going back to work.
Yeah.
Because I recently did that too. And my work history is very different. I studied theater in college, got out of college, tried to do theater full time in New England, you know, so I was just piecing stuff together. Yeah. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. And I always felt good when I could say, this is what I'm doing, even if I was making like dirt for money. Like I didn't care. If I was spending all of my time and at least earning something, I was feeling good about that decision. Of course, this is before children came into my life. Because then when that happened, you know, and then for a while, I actually had my own personal chef business, which again, like I was doing that and other things. And then I'm like, no, I'm going to go whole hog on this and just put 100% of myself into it. And I, you know, I barely broke even for 4 years. Like I didn't charge enough money, and I don't know anything about business. I was really just trying to like provide a good service and make sure I didn't lose money. That was kind of like my goal. And then once I had kids, it was kind of like I would get a part-time job until I was so pregnant I couldn't stand up at work anymore. And then I would go have a baby and stay home for 2 years and then feel compelled to go back. And then I had the second baby. And then after that, you know, once my kids were in school, again, I had a couple of part-time jobs, but they were always just sort of like, I was always like fueled by guilt when I would get those jobs, because I'm like, I want to contribute something to my household. And I know that art doesn't pay the bills. And I'm not really sure what prompted me to just go all in on the writing. I'm trying to think of what, I think I was just unhappy at my current job. Yeah. And I said, you know, now's the time to do it. We were in a good situation. You know, my husband's had the same job for 16 years. He's an elementary school teacher. So it's not like, I didn't marry rich or anything. And I'm not like sitting around eating bonbons, as my kids joke. Like they used to make that joke when they would go to school and I'd be home working. They're like, you're just going to go to the beach and eat bonbons. And I'm like, I wish. But so I decided to kind of just go all in on the writing thing. And it was about the same time that you did, or maybe it was 1 year before, because I had that whole year where I just wrote a bunch of books. I was reading a ton of YA novels. I was like, I can do this. And then I did. I wrote like 4 of them in a row. And it was great. I loved it. It was like, I was still keeping up with my household chores, and I was like down in my basement, like every time a scene would pop into my head, and it would just, everything was just super flow state. And I didn't have anyone reading it or anyone talking to me. And it was, I think that's why I was so productive. And then I started my Substack, and sadly, I mean, the piece that sort of lured me into it was the potential to make income.
Of course. Yeah. That gets all of us. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do this for a living.
Right. Wow. And they really sell you on that in the beginning.
Oh yeah.
That's what pulled me in. And I knew it wouldn't happen right away. I wasn't even confident turning on my paid subscriptions for like close to it. I mean, it wasn't a year, but maybe 6 to 8 months before I was like, okay, I'm just gonna, and then I turned it on, but I didn't say anything. And then eventually I made a pitch and I got like a handful of paid subscribers, but I'm like, this is not a living money. This is like, I can go to McDonald's twice of my kids' money. Do you know what I mean? I mean, which is nice. It's nice to feel that someone values your work and thinks it's worth, you know, whatever you're charging for your annual subscription. But yeah, I figured out pretty quick. I'm like, whoa, yeah. And then I realized I am putting a lot of time and energy into this thing. it was like a full-time job, except there was no compensation. And I hated that bugged me, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I'm a two-parent household and we have two kids, and you can't just flit around forever. You can't. But for me, it was a pride thing, like the decision to go back and find a job. And I knew I didn't just want any job. I'm like, I can't, when you look at part-time work and what it pays now, it's very sad. It's not, I mean, I don't know how people, even who work full-time in a lot of service industry jobs, restaurants or anything, how they even make ends meet. It's crazy, what people are paid. And in education too, it's just no one's paid enough. But then I found something that I used to do that I like doing. I'm, doing the floral design thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a place. It's like a half-hour commute, which is a nice amount of time to be in the car. I haven't been driving for like years because my husband lives right next door to the school where he works. And like, we've saved so much money on gas in the last 10 years, but commute time, which is a neat time to think in a space. And so,
or listen to podcasts.
Hint, hint, everyone. This makes for great car listening. But yeah, it was really hard for me to do it. Like emotionally, I felt like I was quitting a little bit on the writing thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've proven to myself that I can't do this. Now, granted, I only gave it like a year, but you can only string together so many years before you're like, whoa, I need to I need to do something here other than just this. So maybe you're willing to share a little bit about your decision and your experience, and if there was like a button that sort of eventually got pushed where you're like, yeah, I got to go do this now because.
Yeah. The wolf was at the door. I mean, I had a longer runway than most people. I was fortunate, when you work in a kind of a big corporate job and you get the axe like that, you get some severance. So I had a little bit of money, but, I'd gone through a pretty traumatic divorce 5 years ago, and everything is my landscape, my universe is just totally different. I have a mortgage and I've got, I'm still paying off student loans for both of my kids because I didn't want them to have that debt going in. And at the time, it seemed like a good idea because I had a big job and all this stuff. But
right,
yeah, so it was necessity. I mean, it was like I think I say necessity, but we all make choices, and it's just a question of how much inconvenience you want to put on the people around you that you love. And I am not the person that can do that. That's something I really struggle with. So I would rather be wildly uncomfortable than make anyone else uncomfortable, especially the people that are close to me.
Right.
So yeah, and to be fair, for the last year, I didn't not work. I just consulted. Like I would do like pick up a little gig and consult for 6 weeks, and that would make enough money for me to coast the rest of the time. And it would be even part-time consulting. So it was working for me. But that's kind of dried up and it's harder to come by. So I've settled into, and this is the hilarious part. My full-time job is right now working with a startup, which is hilarious. That's like a backup career for me. Most people, the startup is their Hail Mary pass.
Yeah.
Right. The startup for them, so, but it's funny. It's like leg weights. It's taking leg weights off to go into just a traditional sort of building a piece of software as a startup. Everything else besides art is so fucking easy.
Yeah.
I think most of the world has no appreciation for that distinction. When you're an artist, you're being asked to or not being asked, you're called, I think, personally to.
No one's asking us to.
No one is asking you to do it.
That would be great.
You get this harebrained notion that you want to express something very personal to you, and there's no script for it. There's no playbook for it.
Right.
And you start doing it and you start making it. And then you have to convince other people that it's good.
Yeah.
And those two skill sets do not go together.
Mm-mm.
They're polar opposites in most cases.
Right.
And it's brutal. And the amount of time and attention people have for entertainment, which is pretty much what we do as fiction writers.
Yep.
There's a very small budget in most people's lives for that, which is why Substacks like Lenny Rachitsky's product management Substack has, God knows, probably 600,000 subscribers now.
Right.
He is a wealthy man. Anyone who writes a business Substack, anyone who writes about how to make money on Substack,
yep. Right.
All the things that have to do with money or survival, those are things people see as essential and they'll pay for.
Or self-improvement, right? How to just be better than you are.
Right.
I have 10 easy steps. Just give me $70. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I actually was, having a little bit of my biweekly existential crisis yesterday with my husband. And it is hard when you don't possess that other side that's so crucial. Like I do think some people can sort of cross over and have a business mind and an artistic mind, but I think it's a rarity. And he was saying, because I get very like emotional and worked up and I feel down. And he's like, all the things about you that you're frustrated are about you, are the things that make you a good artist. But unfortunately, they're also the things that make you a weaker business person, because I take things personally and I feel, shortchanged when something, because there's a lot of weird transactional stuff that happens, not even monetary transactions, but like support transactions, that if the other side isn't coming back, it feels like you're being like cheated a little bit. You know what I mean? And I don't like those feelings. I don't like business feelings. I just want to like make pretty things and have people consume them and feel better. Like that's
You and me too.
yeah.
That
But it
would
is
be
really
a
hard.
great world.
And you're right what you said. Like it always sounds like when I get into these conversations with people, it's like, oh, artists, they just complain all the time about how hard it is to be an artist. And it's like, yeah, but have you tried it? It's freaking hard. It's like it's so hard. And the amount of work that you do, even if you're just like mentally doing the work, it's exhausting. It really is. But we keep doing it. And so I'm going to get to my last question, which is you and I both know that there are benefits because you see it. You see the people who are kind of breaking through and they've either made the choice or it's just a natural inclination to kind of pick their niche, pick their lane. I'm okay with having this label attached to me for the next 10 or 20 years of what I am and what I make. That, you could argue that choice is more likely to turn a profit for you, literally and figuratively. Like you're potentially going to get further in whatever lane you choose. Whereas for those of us who like, so those could be the benefits of you and I deciding like, okay, I'm only going to write young adult romance novels from now until the end of time. Like I could probably figure out a way in if I did that. If I kept doing that, I might actually be able to crack a surface somewhere.
Yeah.
Once you write 15 YA novels, you're like, hey guys, I got 15 novels here. You want to represent me for one of them? Because then you got 14 lined up in the background. But would I be satisfied creatively? Like we must believe, and you can agree or disagree, that there is a value and a benefit to just making whatever the hell you want and hoping that either somebody's going to embrace you for being that way, for being that, what's the word I'm looking for? Multitudinous.
Yeah.
Or you're going to stumble on something that you didn't know was going to be the thing that pushes you up the ladder. Do you know what I mean? Like,
no, totally.
I keep thinking that, like, I'm doing this podcasting thing and I'm really enjoying it. Like, I'm only doing this because it's fun for me. And that feels really good. But like, who knows? Like, I don't know. Maybe somebody would be like, oh, this person is like really fun to talk to. Maybe I don't know what's going to happen. But
yeah. It's funny. I'm not sure I'm answering the question.
That's okay. It wasn't a very clear question, so I understand.
But I see people that are very successful in mining a particular niche. We talked about Chloe Hope earlier, and she's a great example. She doesn't do paid though at all. But her Substack has grown because she's just a brilliant writer. She's a brilliant writer, and she does these beautiful voiceovers. And her whole thing is death and birds, which seems crazy, but every post she writes, every essay she writes, or memoirs element she writes incorporates one, if not both of those into the piece. And
right.
I think there's a comfort in knowing what to expect every week if you like it and you're like, this is going to happen. I've enjoyed some of that with the long form serials that I've done between Memory of My Shadow and Harmony House. I think I've become a Tuesday routine for many people. They hop on in the morning and on their commute or whenever they exercise, they listen to the episode, and that's been wonderful. I think that's helped me a lot. Although I think this is the most awkward place to probably read long fiction. People would probably prefer if I just gave them the whole audiobook, right, like you did, like you wanted that, instead of having to wait every week.
Yeah, it was hard. Yeah. And what I really want is a print copy because I would eat it in like 2 days. So let me know when that's out because I'm on it.
Yeah, but I think just to close on the idea that persistence in anything is the only variable that we have control over.
Right.
That's just it. You can't control it. You can't control luck. You can't control the market. You can't make other people think a certain thing, but you can just keep doing the thing. And whether you do one narrow thing or whether you do a multitudinous amount of things,
right,
as you and I tend to do, if it brings you joy, I think other people will start to see that joy and you'll go deeper into that. I just heard an interview with a fantastic writer, Percival Everett, who wrote the book Erasure that was made into American fiction, which is just phenomenal.
Which is on my list of I just talked to someone yesterday who was like, you have to see this.
This
so
is
I will definitely
so good, so good. But he's written like 20 something novels or something, virtually, I guess, unknown by the larger public, right? But this the American fiction was this breakthrough thing for him. And that's just an example of exactly what we're talking about. You know, you love something, you keep digging into it and getting better and better. And at some point, someone's going to go, oh, wow.
Right.
There's something magic in there.
Yeah. But the trick is sticking with it, which is really hard. And actually, you just said something. I have this quote that I saved from a conference that I went to a couple of years ago. It was actually a children's literature conference, but there was a woman, she was the keynote speaker at this conference. And at the time I had taken a course with this other woman who always gave the advice. She led the orientation for the conference, and her advice was, you know, find one thing, one takeaway from the conference, like find the one thing that's going to like fuel your next big leap or whatever.
Yeah.
And this woman talked about like, you know, her experience, and she's now got a couple of published middle grade novels, and she's doing really well, but it was a long haul, as it usually is. And the quote that I left with was, if you love it, pursue it, no matter the outcome. And I wrote it down like everywhere around my desk. I was like, it's such a big, you have to keep doing it and not think about the end, because ideally there is no end. You're just going to keep doing it, and things are going to come your way and leave you. And that's just part of the journey. So yeah. Leave it to me to get all misty there at the end of our interview. But I knew I would with you, because you're like, I don't know, you have this presence about you.
Thank you so much, Meg. This is wonderful. An honor to be able to talk with you.
And I look forward to sharing this with my readers and yours very soon.
Great.
All right. Take care, Ben. Okay. Thank you.
I don't care if you believe me. Fire is coming, fire is coming. Birds of the meadow, birds of the meadow. Fire is coming, fire is coming. Birds of the meadow, birds of the meadow.
Hey there. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please let me know by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, rating, or review, depending on where you're listening, or by sharing this podcast with your favorite people. Stock Fiction is a dynamic anthology of short fiction, essays, poetry, humor, and multimedia experiments written and produced by me, Meg Oolders. If you're into the stuff I'm making, or you're just into supporting the dynamic individual who makes it, I hope you'll consider becoming a free or paid subscriber today. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.